Someone sent me a photo last week of a Rolleiflex they just won at auction. $400, mint case, glass looked clean in the listing photos. They thought they'd found the deal of the year. They hadn't. Not because the camera was bad, because nobody told them the real price of a 50-year-old camera isn't the number on the auction listing. It's what you pay after that, once a tech gets the back off and starts looking at the shutter blades. I'm Gary Simmons. I've spent a long career with cameras open on the bench in front of me, not reading spec sheets, actually pulling the top plates off and looking at what's inside. If that's the kind of thing you're into, stick around. There's a new teardown here most weeks. Hit subscribe if you want it in your feed. No pressure either way. Today, we're doing 7 cameras. Not the 7 most famous, the 7 I'd actually call the best ever built, judged by the only standard that matters to me: what's really happening inside the body and whether it holds up. Let's get into it. Number 7, the Leica and the shutter curtain nobody thinks about until it fails. Everybody knows the name Leica. Almost nobody's actually looked at what made the early ones work or what kills them. Oscar Barnack built the first working prototype around 1913 using standard 35mm movie film stock, doubling the frame to 24-36. That format is still what camera makers call full frame 100 years later. That's Barnack's fingerprint, whether people know his name or not. Here's the bench reality. The Leica's focal plane shutter, in the early screw mount bodies right through the M3, runs on 2 curtains of rubberized silk, tensioned by a mainspring, timed by a gear train and an escapement. No electronics, pure clockwork. That's beautiful engineering, and it's also the failure point. Rubberized silk dries out. 50, 60, 70 years on, you'll find curtains with pinholes you can only see by holding the shutter open to a bulb. You'll find slow speeds that hang because the old grease in the escapement has gone gummy. The camera fires fine at 1/250 and stalls at 130. None of that means the camera's junk. It means it needs a proper curtain replacement and a clean lube adjust. And that service, done right, runs a few $100s depending on who's doing it. The other thing to check before you buy is the rangefinder patch. The prism and mirror assembly can de-silver with age, and a hazy or doubled patch is expensive to correct. A clean screw-mount Leica 2 or 3F, mechanically sound, is genuinely affordable next to what an M3 commands. Same shutter logic, same lens mount family, a fraction of the price. Number 6, the Widelux, and the camera you can't get parts for anymore. The Widelux, built by Pen & Pamra Shoko starting in 1958, doesn't have a shutter in the way you'd expect. The lens itself sits on a turret and physically swings across the body in an arc to sweep a narrow slit of light over curved film to cover a field of view past 120 degrees. There's no conventional focal plane curtain to fail, but there's a spring-driven gear train that has to rotate that lens turret at a precisely controlled speed, and that's the part that gets people. If the drive spring or the governor gets old or under-lubricated, the rotation speed isn't constant across the sweep. You won't see it on the ground glass, you'll see it on the developed film, one side of a panoramic frame slightly darker than the other, because the slit lingered too long in one section of the arc. It's subtle, and it's one of the most common complaints with these bodies. The other issue is supply. Widelux production ended in 2000, and the factory's original drawings were reportedly lost in a fire, so replacement parts for the swing mechanism are essentially gone. If you find one, budget for the fact that repair means a technician fabricating parts by hand, not ordering from a catalog. That scarcity is a big part of why the prices climbed the way they did. This went from a niche tool to a genuine collector's item, helped along by well-known enthusiasts in film circles who kept it visible over the years. Number 5, the Rolleiflex, and the leaf shutter that ages differently than its curtain cousins. Reinhold Heydek's twin-lens design, refined through Franke and Heydek starting in 1929, uses a leaf shutter built into the lens assembly itself. A compore, or later synchro-compore unit, a small ring of interleaving metal blades that open and close around the optical axis rather than traveling across the film plane. That construction tends to age differently than a curtain shutter. It's still mechanical, and it still gums up. The tell is similar to the Leica's, slow speeds sticking or hanging while the fast speeds fire fine, because old grease inside the shutter housing thickens over decades. Unlike a curtain shutter,
A leaf shutter rarely tears, it just gets sluggish, and a proper service resets it. The meter is its own story on models like the 2.8F. It's a selenium cell, no battery required. It generates its own small current off ambient light, which sounds like an advantage, and mostly is, except selenium cells fatigue over age and UV exposure. A meter reading a stop or two low on a decades-old cell isn't unusual. Test it against a known good meter before you trust it, or just shoot it manually and treat the built-in meter as a bonus rather than a given. Buy a Rolleiflex, check the focusing screen for haze, run the shutter through its full speed range with your ear next to it. You can hear a leaf shutter that's dragging, and you're likely looking at a camera built to run another 50 years. Number 4. The Contarex, nicknamed the Cyclops, and the repair bill that outran the camera. This is the one where I have to be careful with the word best, because the Contarex is a case study in engineering that outran good sense a little. Zeiss Ikon's Contarex, launched in 1958, mounted a large coupled meter cell above the lens, the Cyclops, linked through a mechanical needle trap system to the aperture ring, so the meter reading and the aperture setting were physically coupled to each other through gears and springs, not electronics. Technicians who've had one open will tell you getting to the top plate is a project in itself. Dozens of small components have to come off in the right sequence before you can even see the meter linkage. That complexity is exactly why so few people can service these today. When the coupling mechanism drags or the needle sticks, you're not looking at a common repair. You're looking for one of a shrinking number of specialists who still know that linkage by heart, and the bill reflects that. The lenses are extraordinary, genuinely some of the sharpest Zeiss glass ever mounted to a 35mm body. But between 1960 and 1967, Zeiss Ikon sold roughly 32,000 Contarex bodies against something in the range of 225,000 Leica M3s over a similar stretch. And the gap wasn't really about optics. It was about a company building the most complicated version of the right idea. If you find a working Contarex, my honest advice is to treat the meter as a bonus you don't rely on, and buy it for the glass, not the mechanism. Number 3. The Minox, and the tiny chain that can end the camera's life. Walter Zapp's subminiature design, reaching the market in 1938, shoots an 8x11mm frame, small enough that the whole body disappears into a closed hand. What most people don't realize when they pick one up secondhand is how that body actually works. Extending the case telescopes the camera open, and that single motion does 3 jobs at once. It advances the film, cocks the tiny leaf shutter, and advances the frame counter, all through a fine metal chain running inside the body, what techs who service these call the measuring chain. That chain is elegant, and it's also the camera's single point of failure. Decades of use or decades of sitting unused with old lubricant hardening around it, and that chain can kink, stretch, or snap. When it does, the camera doesn't just get unreliable. The film advance and shuttercocks stop working together, and you're looking at a specialist repair for a part that isn't sitting on a shelf anywhere. Later versions, like the Minox B from 1958, added a selenium meter ring around the lens, with the same aging concerns as the Rolleiflex's cell. The practical advice is here. Before you buy one, extend and retract the body slowly and feel for grinding, hesitation, or a chain that doesn't return smoothly. A clean example is a genuinely remarkable piece of miniature machining. A worn one is a paperweight with a good story.
Number 2, the Exakta, and the mirror that has to be perfectly timed to work at all. Carl Nuchterlein's Kine Exakta, released in 1936, was the first 35mm single-lens reflex camera. The first body where you looked through the actual taking lens instead of a separate viewfinder window. That layout is the one nearly every SLR since has built on in some form. 2 things make an Exakta interesting on the bench. First, the ergonomics run backwards from anything you design today. Shutter release, film advance, and shutter speed dial are all on the left side of the body, a layout that takes real relearning if you've handled any camera made after about 1960. Second, and more important mechanically, the mirror and shutter have to be precisely timed against each other. The mirror has to swing up and clear the film plane before the curtain fires, and swing back down after. On a camera pushing 80 or 90 years old, that timing relationship can drift, and when it does, you get vignetting, a partially dark frame, or a mirror that hangs up entirely.
That's not a symptom of a bad camera. It's a symptom of a camera that hasn't been serviced in a long while, and it's fixable by someone who knows the linkage. What it means for a buyer is simple. Never trust an Exakta's mirror timing on looks alone. Run a test roll, check the corners of every frame for shading, and if the mirror doesn't return crisply every time, factor a full service into what you're willing to pay for it. Number 1. The Hasselblad 500 series and the modular idea that never really needed fixing. Victor Hasselblad built his reputation on wartime reconnaissance camera work in Sweden, and the 500C, introduced in 1957, is where that expertise turned into something built for civilians. The core idea is what makes it the best on this list from a longevity standpoint. It's modular. Lens, film back, and viewfinder all separate from the body independently. And, this is the detail that matters on the bench, the shutter lives in the lens, not in the body. Every lens is its own self-contained synchro-compure leaf shutter unit. That's a maintenance advantage most people don't think about until they own a system with 3 or 4 lenses. Each one ages and needs service on its own schedule, independent of the body. A worn shutter on a 150mm doesn't affect an 80mm at all. It also means buying a body and lens as a set requires checking both separately. A clean body paired with a lens whose shutter is dragging is a common trap in the used market, and sellers don't always know enough to mention it. Worth knowing before you buy. Early 500C bodies don't have an instant return mirror. Fire the shutter and the viewfinder stays blacked out until you wind to the next frame. Not a fault, just the mechanical reality of the original design. The film backs deserve their own mention. The dark slide interlock, the mechanism that physically prevents you from firing the shutter with the dark slide still in, or removing a loaded back without it, is a small but critical piece of engineering. And worn interlock pins are one of the more common issues on backs that have seen real use. Check that interlock before anything else on a used back. It's the difference between a functioning system and a roll of double-exposed film. 12 Hasselblad bodies were left behind on the lunar surface across the Apollo missions, with only the film magazines carried home to save weight on the return trip. That's not a marketing line. It's documented fact from a program that was extraordinarily precise about every ounce it flew. Walter Schirra flew a modified 500C on his own initiative aboard Mercury Atlas 8 in 1962, and NASA kept using the system through Apollo from there. The camera earned that trust because the design held up under conditions engineers couldn't fully test for in advance, and it's still holding up in working kits and collections today. Here's what I keep coming back to, looking at all 7 of these side by side on a bench. None of them are perfect. Every one has a part that wears, a lubricant that dries out, a mechanism that only a handful of people left still know how to touch. That's not a knock against any of them. It's just what 50 to 90 years of real mechanical life looks like, and it's worth remembering that no 2 surviving examples of any of these are in identical condition. The serial number tells you the year it was born. It doesn't tell you how the last owner treated it. If you're looking at one of these in the used market, my honest advice is the same every time. Don't buy on the name and don't buy on the photos in the listing. Ask for the shutter to be exercised on video. Listen for hesitation in the slow speeds. Ask when it was last serviced and by whom. A camera like this is a piece of precision machinery first and a piece of history second, and the machinery is what you're actually taking home. I'll leave you with this. Somebody built every one of these by hand, decades before computer modeling existed, and got the tolerances close enough that a good example still runs true today. That's worth sitting with for a minute before you decide what any of them are worth to you.